Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Lisa March. I'm with Partner in Publishing. Welcome to our webinar. We'll give folks a few minutes to sign in. We'll get started roughly at about 5 after 2 Eastern. If there's anyone that has any questions before we get started, there's a Q&A box here on Zoom. So Laura Mann will be manning the box there. If you have any questions or having any technical issues, hearing us, seeing us, please let us know. Okay, is that a cue to get started, Amit?
I was just trying to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. That's all.
Great. And Laura, can you confirm that we're seeing folks on the call and ready?
We are having everybody join. There's been a few people that have joined in just the last minute or so.
Okay, very good. We'll still give everyone about 3 minutes to settle in, and then we'll get started.
Sounds like a plan.
So if those of you have just joined us in the last couple of minutes, we will get started at 5 after. If you're having any issues seeing our screen or hearing us, please let us know in the Q&A box. Laura Mann will be taking a look at that during and after our presentation and address any questions you may have. And we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so it is 2:05. We're going to kick off our webinar, Empowering STEM Students at the Intersection of Placement, Instruction, and Retention. We have a few housekeeping tips and rules to share with you during the webinar today. It is being recorded and it will be posted for download. But in order to make sure that we have a smooth event here today, we're going to be placing everybody on mute. We will have 15 minutes for Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, and we really do want this to be an interactive session. So please, any questions or comments that you might have, please do put them in the chat box, and then we will be addressing them at the end of our call. So our speakers today, Dr. Amit Savkar. Amit, thank you very much for joining. A little background on Amit. He is the founder of Stemify and also the CEO. He's an associate professor at the University of Connecticut. He holds a PhD in mechanical engineering and is currently completing another PhD in educational psychology, measurement evaluation, and assessment. He's expected to finish at the end of this year. He also has spent the last 13 years teaching in the math department at UConn. He's a teaching fellow and the director of Quantitative Center. And then he is also a faculty director of the Innovation House Learning Community. And if that isn't enough, he also is the director of online learning in the math department at UConn. I'm also joined here with Laura Mann, who's the vice president of sales at Stemify, and would love for any of you to direct questions in the chat box that Laura will be addressing at the end of our event here. I'm Lisa March. I'm the founder of Partner in Publishing. I'm a managing partner here of all projects involving STEM. And we have been watching what Amit and the folks at Stemify have been doing over the last year. We are really very excited to be partnering with them. One of the things that we consistently get from faculty and even teachers at this point is that there's a real challenge with developmental math skills. This year, we're coming off of, even as everyone knows, a very challenging time for students. And many of the requests that we get are how we're going to face the reality of the students graduating from high school and entering college. And so today, I would love to have us focus on the reality that we're facing and the kinds of things that have been done at Stemify and specifically at UConn to address these challenges and the reality. So with that, Amit, I would like to turn it over to you to talk about what it is that we're facing as we enter the next couple of months, and really a pervasive problem that we've had with students as it relates to STEM disciplines.
So thanks, Lisa, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to people from different time zones that we have today. Really appreciate your time to take to kind of go through this conversation rather than just a presentation. So the reality is that we are losing STEM students on the way to the college. We are also losing STEM students while they're at college. And what we are realizing is that over these years, the existing solutions, the interventions that we have to work with as faculty are not enough to address the issue. So what happens really is that we have 3.5 million jobs in STEM every year. That's an average amount of jobs that are available in STEM fields. Yet we only see about 350,000 students graduating with STEM degrees. That's barely 10% of the workforce that is needed. And on top of that, you see that there is a hell of a lot of money spent in remediation, either by the states, either by the schools, and even parents and students in this process. So when you think about this as a holistic problem, this has been existing for a long, long time, resulting in the fact that 48% of graduating high schoolers actually want to pursue STEM. And yet we don't have that kind of production for our workforce.
Yeah, I mean, it is such an interesting statistic. And what do you think is the issue, and how do we address it?
So again, that's a wonderful, so the STEM has become a buzzword, but to be really understanding science, technology, engineering, mathematics, it is really the M, where this M in STEM is what is preventing students from really pursuing some of the STEM degrees and disciplines that they want to pursue. So when you think about a student who is graduating from a high school, can you imagine 2.4 million students graduate every year from high school? Some have the dream to cure cancer. Some talk about going on to Mars. Some talk about joining SpaceX. Some talk about astronomy. And some are now talking about vaccines and biology. And in the field of genetics. The reality of the matter is that these students are tested with an exam in a way by most universities to understand their pre-existing knowledge in mathematics alone. And when you see that 34% of the students who are testing through these placement tests need remediation. Now, I don't believe in finger pointing. Let us accept that as our reality. This is where we are. We see that 34% of the students coming out of school actually need remediation. We lose those students a lot. Almost 70% of those students never complete a non-credit course. Then if you think about the next step, those who get placed in intermediate algebra, the national average of success in intermediate algebra course is not more than 55%. Now we have lost half the students there. And then comes the pre-calculus and the calculus, after which they can actually start taking the discipline specific courses such as in chemistry, in physics, in engineering, in biology. So you can imagine we start at 2.4 million graduates from high school, and we are just close to graduating 350,000 students in STEM. That is indeed a humongous problem when you think about how they are being lost in the pipeline, the STEM pipeline of what we call uh, the STEM degree graduation.
Absolutely. I mean, those numbers are really staggering, and there's tremendous opportunity if we can find a way to get students through. We've been working with schools here in Connecticut, and I would love to know, Laura, if Sue Lunsbury from Tunxus Community College has joined, because I would love for Sue to talk a little bit about what she sees as the opportunity to help students be more successful. This really, really is a challenge. And if we could find some ways to help students persist, I think we'll all be in a much better place. So, oh, great, you're there, Sue. Welcome. Would love for you to talk a little bit about your experiences at Tunxus.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar, and I'm happy to talk about my experiences. We have, I think, being a community college, an even higher percentage of students that need remediation when they come in. I would say for us, it's actually a larger percentage than 34%. And with everything that has been going on with the pandemic and not being able to do placement testing and things like that, we have been working with Stemify to do a couple of things. One is to just get an idea of where our students will be most successful. So we've been using it partially to help place them, just to get an idea of what their foundational skills are. And it has done a better job at placing them than our old placement test did. And so we've been able to see that students who've been placed with it have been more successful than our other placement measures. But not only that, once students have access to it, they can also fill in the gaps because there's a video library with Stemify that they can use. It pinpoints when they take this placement test, which is really more of like a diagnostic test. Those questions pinpoint their areas of weakness for them and actually point them to videos that they can use to help them. And it's not just math students, like Amit was saying. This is students, who might need some help in their science courses or, an economics course or anything like that. So we're trying to grow the program actually at Tunxus, but we have been very happy so far working with Stemify. I'm not, is there anything else specific that you wanted me to talk about?
Susan, that's exactly, I mean, the thing is, I think the critical aspect is there is a common intersection of our students who struggle. across different universities, colleges, community colleges, 2-year, 4-year, private, public. This problem is quite prevalent across all different verticals of the higher education spectrum. So, I mean, thank you very much for addressing what you have been going in Tungses. But I think that is what it comes down to, and I agree with the things that you have said. So when we think about this, I think it is important to, before we go into the details, it is important to think about what does it really take to succeed. I mean, for a moment, we need to take a step back and think about this as the holistic aspect. There is not a single silver bullet that is going to change things. So for example, when we think about our students, there are things like students being prepared to be in college. What does their pre-existing knowledge help them with? How is their first year experience once they get into college? While these seem to be very specific to the students and their individual experience, it's also important what contributes to that: the advising, the sense of belonging, and then the retention to graduation. So there are so many aspects that one can think about that contribute to the success of the students along their journey in the STEM discipline.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Sue said really resonates. I also spent 5 years teaching at Manchester Community College, and it really is important to think about these foundational skills, not just in math courses, but the effect that it has on anyone who's taking courses that require foundational math. And really, the UConn story is a great one. I would love even to hear from folks who might be on this call today. Sue, I will be connecting with you to do a case study at Tungses. So thank you for volunteering. But if there's anyone else who would like to work with us to really measure where you are today and the efficacy with making just some changes as it relates to implementing what Stemify has to offer, please at the end of this call, let Laura know and I will be in touch. But Amit, I would love for you to tell us more about what you did at UConn. Really, the UConn story, I think, is a great one. So if you could give us some details, that would be terrific.
Most definitely, Lisa. I think the key here is to understand what it took me to be trying to understand how to help our students. So at UConn, it was no different. Frankly speaking, this was about fall of 2013 when the higher administration actually asked the department head about why the DFW rates in Calc 1 and 2 were so high. And there were questions like, is the pre-calculus course actually a pre-calculus course or a terminal course? Who were actually the students who were taking that course? There was a lot of pressure to fundamentally improve the results and obviously not reduce the rigor of the course, but to change the way we think how students were being either placed or the instruction that was being offered, or there was a combination of both. What it had done is that these courses, the gateway courses, as some universities call them or some colleges call them, had got a bad reputation of being weed out courses, which is actually quite the opposite of what our department wanted. We want our students to actually learn and retain the knowledge so that they can actually use that and apply that in other STEM disciplines such as chemistry, physics, biology at a later point in time. But that was clearly not what was happening at UConn. So they asked me, what are we supposed to do? So I got involved in this in early on in fall. And to begin with, because of the last 5 years before this that I was teaching, I was like, I really need to understand what is their pre-existing knowledge. So I actually just prepared a 15-question test, which was on foundational math. And forgive me if I keep calling it foundational math, because where I come from, I am from India, and we only had math. We didn't have algebra 1, algebra 2, geometry. We just had math. We did math. So I was like, let me think about the foundational math and let me see what it is that the students are having issues with. So I gave this test to the students who were already placed in Calc 1 and pre-calculus. They were taking this course during that fall semester. I gave them that as a quiz, and that was about 1,400 students, I remember. And I actually took all that data and their grade data at the end of the semester and found that this 15-question test explained more variance in the data than any other factor or thing that could have explained that variation in the grades of calculus 1 and pre-calculus. That basically told me one thing: okay, these students are not placed in the right course to begin with. All right, so at that time the only option there was Alex, and it was a pilot. It was piloted in 2014. But at the time that I understood so I started understanding what Alex was doing, I realized that it is not enough that it identifies the gaps. What are we going to do about it? So we are just saying that, yes, we have identified this gap, now go do drill and practice and some more problems. Well, they're going to repeat the same mistake over and over again. How are they learning anything differently? So that's when I started thinking about building a data integration and assessment system. So now what I did with that system is I took these courses, Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and pre-calculus. I took every single question on every single summative assessment. When I say summative assessment, I'm primarily talking about their midterm 1, midterm 2, and the final exam. So imagine that each midterm had 15 to 20 questions and the finals had 30 questions. I recorded the performance of students on these individual questions for these 4 courses over almost, now it's 6-7 years now. I'm still continuing to do that for a longitudinal study, but I did that for 2 years. That was the first thing. The second part of the data was I collected the demographic data, not specifically from the perspective of getting their SAT scores and all the SATs, math, verbal, and so on and so forth. I then collected the data from our own courses, the instructors, the TAs. I included the Alex data, which was a single score. And we also have a Q center that is basically a peer-to-peer center for tutoring. So I added the visit data. Once I had all of this data together in one place, I actually created close to 1,800 concept tags hierarchically going from algebra 1 all the way to calculus 3. So I was trying to figure out if a question on Calc 1, let's say a limit question that comes across as x square minus 4 divided by x minus 2 as the limit of x goes to 2, what's the answer, requires students to recall factorization of a square minus b square. So then that question got tagged all the way back to algebra 1, where that concept would have originally introduced. And then the student has to recall it in a calculus course when they are actually taking an exam on limits. So now you can see that this entire hierarchy of courses and question tags was now put together in such a way that when I ran the analysis, I was able to start looking at different performance between lectures. So like within lectures, is there a difference? Within sections, so like we have this hierarchy where we have one large lecture of 250 students and then we have 10 discussion sections. So I wanted to understand how students are performing in the different lectures as well as within lecture, within discussion sections. I used some psychometric techniques like hierarchical linear modeling to look at the consistency. And then I thought of creating based on these tags, I actually did some factor analysis and said, let me look at latent classes based on factors. So I actually did some mixture modeling there to find out high performing, low performing, and medium performing students based on their conceptual understanding. So you can imagine that this was a lot of work in terms of creating a map to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of students. I also was keeping in mind that because I had the demographic data from which schools they came in, I actually wanted to make sure that I'm mapping all of this to the Common Core. This is what was used in Connecticut, but also any state standards can be mapped onto these. And from there on, I created a new placement test. So really, zooming down into conceptual identification, I said, these were the main ideas: solving equations, manipulating expressions, functions, exponentials, and trig. Yes, Lisa.
So I'm sorry, Amit, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we do have, I'm wondering, can you tell us what MPE stands for?
Sure. So that's math placement exam.
Okay.
That's what it stands for. Thank you. So I was talking about the conceptual identification. And do you have another question, Lisa?
Not right now.
No, just okay. I saw your hands up, so I was just checking. Um, so key concept identifications were based on broad ideas of these things. And you can see that there's a word problem. And I'm sure, as I have seen my students struggle with the word problem, whether it is because of the language of mathematics itself or ELA, students do find it difficult to make the connections of what they have learned as discrete concepts to take it back together and put it together. So this was a one major, I think word problem itself is a category in itself in terms of the conceptual understanding and application when you think about the Bloom's taxonomy. So all of this was done together at the end to make sure that I understood the variance across states. So I was actually able to map the entire state of Connecticut by district schools to actually see how strengths and weaknesses in these identified concepts was coming up, so that I could make sure that when I was going to create something for my students, I was going to take this into consideration.
Really super helpful. So Amit, what were the outcomes from your studies there at UConn? And one of the other questions is also, did you use any additional platforms, data, or systems to inform what the plans were? Stemify, was there anything else that you used in addition to Stemify?
No, I haven't used any other platforms. This Stemify has come. So this, what I'm talking about is the journey from 2013 to 2018. And I'll certainly tell you how the transition to Stemify has happened at a later point. But this was all done by me, created the data integration system. I had to code it with a graduate student, and all the things that I was using as whatever the resources that were available at UConn. If you are asking me in terms of the different systems of my uh, placement exam that I created was put into the Blackboard directly. And then the data integration was its own separate platform. And then the videos that I created were all in a different place. So all of that was scattered across different places before Stemify, which is what is happening at UConn.
Understood. And really one of the things that we are so intrigued by is the amount of time that you as a faculty member spent with your students building Stemify. I think that there's so many opportunities to introduce technology, but what's never clear is whether it's been developed by faculty specifically for students. And I think Stemify really tells that story.
I think,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. That's the whole point. I was trying to look at how I can help students at UConn. And I wanted to make sure that when I'm doing something, it has to be student centric. It cannot be about anyone else. It has to be about our students. It has to be about how we can help students to get further. Because when I spoke with other colleagues, not just at UConn, everyone seemed to have had the same experience or a similar experience when they were trying to help their students, when they were trying to identify what it is that their students were struggling with. So you mentioned about the outcomes. I'll talk about them. So essentially, through all of this data analysis and research and putting together all these concept mapping, what came out of that was a strong, reliable math placement exam where every question was conceptually tagged in a hierarchical form, and reliability studies were performed on that test, which were very hard, in terms of making sure that what I was trying to do, it was actually being told to me by the psychometric analysis that that's true. So that was a really good feeling that I had. And that also led for me, once the identification of gaps was done, I'm like, okay, now that I know these are the gaps, how do I make interventions? What do I do about them? That's where I started recording these lightboard videos on topics that I found were critical. And then within that videos, I was like, I'm not physically there for my students. How do I make it interactive? And I just didn't want to make it interactive because there were other platforms which could have done just a quiz question. But I didn't want, so a quiz question doesn't tell me unless it's right. I only know whether the student got it right or wrong, but I don't know why the student got it wrong. I mean, that was my intention, because when I have a student in my office hour, I am trying to, when the student comes in, he or she, they will go through their problem and they'll get it wrong. I'm looking at what they are doing and I find the issue. I tell them, let's fix this at that point. So it is literally just in time remediation. I don't tell them to go and take an Algebra 1 course if they are having issues with factorization. I help them with factorization. So for me, that's what I went into while making videos, that I want to make sure when the student watches the video, I want to know whether they have a conceptual understanding what that was just put in the video. So I have these quizzes that come up, and then there's a context sensitive feedback that gets into the video itself by virtue of video moving back at a certain place if they chose a certain answer. And that's the kind of interactive, you know, interaction that I started creating. Now, at that time, there was one of the vendors that I had used, but that vendor went underground. So I had to redevelop this whole quiz engine on my own. Uh, so at the bottom, at the end of the day, this is what happened. We saw the DFWs go down. The national average is about 25%. We are about 10 to 15% at UConn. And that's where, you know, the value is not just in improving outcomes within the courses. It is about how well the students retained the knowledge that they had gained from one course to another. And that was something that through the data integration system, because it was also mapping everything from Calc 1, Calc 2, and Calc 3 with pre-calculus, we were able to inform instructors, TAs, and make systemic changes so that we could continue to maintain and improve the rigor of the course as well as the outcomes within the course.
Yeah, understood. I mean, really putting together the case study was so eye-opening. You had just tremendous success. I've already seen a few folks interested in participating in a case study at their school too. We will potentially lean on you, Amit, to help us put some structure around that. But really, yeah, I mean, I think, so what do we do now? I mean, we are, again, very interested in helping schools who want to tackle this issue. We now know that you don't sleep, Amit, and so we can get from 0 to 85 with your help. How do we scale this? How do we make this possible at other schools?
So I think that was one of the questions that UConn was asking me to, because what after this kind of success, I was actually saying that let's help me take it to the next stage. And that's where I actually, Stemify really came about, where my partner there, Bill, actually said that, Amit, you're doing a lot of things that could be taken in a very specific way. And, you know, we can talk about placement, preparation, and personalization at an individual level. So essentially, what it meant was to really think about what was my thought process in what I was doing at UConn. So essentially, it was a philosophical difference where I thought that, you know, when I am a professor and I'm teaching Calc 1, I'm not giving 50 different final exams. I'm giving them one final exam and I'm expecting students to get there. So what am I doing? Well, I'm recognizing the fact that not every student is starting at the same point, which means I have to adapt my instruction when they come to my office or office hours. And that was one of the key differences where I thought I need to have my instruction adapted to my student rather than have an adaptive testing. The next thing was the interactive video lessons, which I thought that just asking them to go and look at a YouTube video doesn't tell me whether they understood what they needed to understand. So I needed to bring that into how I went ahead with. And I also saw that over the 4 or 5 years that I was doing these analyses, I realized that I had to stick to psychometric properties of, what these. So, many times people ask me, oh, so how do you know it's a good question? Well, or when I ask somebody, how do you know it's a good question? They say, yeah, the average was a 75. Like, what does that mean? That an average was a 75? A question is a good question, in my opinion, if the response to that question from the student tells us something about the student's understanding. At least this is how I perceived it. I'm sure there are different philosophies to that, but I try to understand what do I understand from the assessment that I give about students learning. So from there on, I used, item response theory, looking at distractor analysis and classification based on concepts rather than just a single score, and then looking at sub scores of variety, like are the students weak in logs and exponents while they might be very strong in expression manipulation, so on and so forth. So those were philosophical differences. But once I got through those, I think the team at Stemify, the engineering team at Stemify, put my 5 pillars together. And I always start with this, that curriculum is the most important thing when it comes to a student. We talk about curriculum, we talk about what our students need to learn to be in a certain discipline. What are the things that are required? I mean, this is a constant conversation within advisors, within people of in the department. Are we doing enough? What are we doing? How are we doing? Are we addressing the needs of the students? Are we addressing the needs of the major when we say that we want a math major to know? So curriculum is important, and Stemify has looked at the curriculum from OpenStack, mapped it to the Common Core. Different state standards can be mapped in pre-algebra, beginning algebra, intermediate algebra, and college algebra. And we are constantly growing that curriculum in terms of what it is that we are adding to the platform. The second thing that I feel is important is assessment, because again, when we think about assessment, I just said, the assessment is important from the perspective of making sure that we are able to understand what the students are doing, and the platform allows us to actually get precise identification of gaps, and which creates the personalized study plans. These personalized study plans are at a concept level, and they guide the students from one part to another. Now remember, these are all very modern. We are using a very modern UI interface, which actually resonates well with our students. And that is another thing that becomes an important part when you think about analytics. So what does analytics do here is, think about it from 3 perspectives. It gives you an institutional ability to see how the students are doing in your institution. For an instructor, it gives him or her the ability to actually understand what the gaps are, what the strengths are, how the gaps are being bridged, and what are the students actually doing? How are they interacting with the system? And at the student level, it gives a very clear path for them to follow so that they can use their strengths to overcome their weaknesses through the instruction that is specific and personalized. And at the end of it all, we have a very strong digital library of content, which we are constantly adding videos and instructional videos, that many times it is not just about one video per content or concept. We are actually adding different videos for the same concept, so that different perspectives are brought in for the same concept. The focus is always going to be of conceptual understanding and then its application. So that's what makes it all Stemify.
Excellent. So that's perfect timing. And I will say that the videos have been a clear differentiator in talking to faculty across the country. That makes a big difference in in learning, retention, and as you said, ensuring that that information carries through to their curriculum of studies. So we, again, timing is great. So we have some questions in the Q&A that I think, Laura, if you're ready, we can answer some of those questions. And again, if you have any interest in working with us and doing a case study at your college, please let us know. We are looking, we only have probably 5 or 6 spots. So we would love to have a conversation with you after this event. So Laura, turning it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. So a few questions have come in. And Amit, I think this one will be directed to you. It asks, did you compare your findings with the ALEX PPL data from your students?
Yes, I did. I actually did compare. So the prototype of Stemify went into full implementation in 2017, and till 2016, when I piloted the Stemify at UConn, I compared the data and I found actually that as much as I would like to say Stemify placed and remediated students better at UConn, because the remediation part was missing from Alex. So the placement scores and the cut scores that I created for UConn placed the students as well, if not better than Alex.
Okay, thank you for answering that, Amit. Sure. The second question is also probably directed at you. Someone is asking, can you talk a bit about the grading system? They state, my department is starting to look at standard-based grading, giving students multiple chances to show competencies on a set of standards rather than high-stakes testing.
Now, that's an excellent question. So this is a philosophical question on assessment, and I'll actually address it that way because it is important to, so standards-based testing is very, it's a great way to think about how you're assessing your students. The question then for UConn became, can we do that? So we actually, one of my lecture colleagues had done this for Calc 1, but for a small size, 30 students. The problem was that we couldn't scale that kind of grading for 1,200 students in one single semester. So I think the standard-based assessments are much, if you have a limited number of students, you can do it. And it certainly gives a better understanding of how well the students have mastered certain concepts if they are well scaffolded. And there is a lot of research on standard-based testing. So I mean, I could go on and on, but I don't want to, take too much of you guys' time. I'm saying, yes, that is a possibility. And it is the conceptual understanding is certainly more addressed through maybe standard-based testing. Again, that's my personal opinion. It is possible. The problem is in the scaling part of it.
Okay, thank you, Amit. The other question that came in had to do with one of the earlier slides stating the money that is spent on remediation. Is that a figure that was on STEM students alone or all students combined?
Well, that's interesting. That figure alone is only for math. Developmental math is a $2 billion industry. I only talked about $1 billion, which are spent by, the what do you call, states and colleges. There are actual families and students spending over $1 billion in developmental math alone. This is developmental math alone. So it's not just STEM, it's actually just focused on math. That's the amount of money that is being actually spent. And it is actually in 2012, the PCAST report at the President's Council during Obama administration actually mentions this very specific, where they talk about the developmental math as a $2 billion industry with a success rate of 17%, which means 17% students who have to take 2 or more remedial courses actually have the chance to actually graduate with a 4-year degree, and 34% chance of students to graduate with a 2-year degree.
Okay, I know that we have come to the end of the scheduled time. There's still some additional questions. I know, we've all talked about staying on longer if needed. So Lisa, if there were any concluding comments you wanted to make, otherwise we can ask some of these additional questions.
That sounds great. I mean, what I'll say is we should stay on for a little while longer in case there are folks who would like to opt in to working with us. The other thing that I would also really like to highlight, Amit, in closing, is given that many states have done away with placement tests and developmental math, and now we're going into the school year without standardized tests, maybe SATs are now optional and ACTs are optional. Can you just leave us with some parting words on how you see Stemify being helpful in those scenarios?
Sure. The reality is not going to change. In fact, it is going to hit us hard when we actually go back to our classrooms. The last 1.5 years, and I say this as 1.5 years because last spring is when we got into this pandemic, and it's been almost 3 semesters worth of loss of in-person instruction that has happened for our students who are graduating from high school. It has had a profound impact on students' learning. We are going to see students needing more help. And with the idea that no more developmental mathematics courses are being offered, it becomes even more important to allow students to have access to these resources while they are in their courses during the semester. So for example, this was something that I did not realize at first, that when I made these videos, the students who had already taken the placement exam and had been placed in Calc 1 were actually going back and looking at these videos to refresh their knowledge. What also came out of this was when students went past calculus and they wanted to look at something else, when they were in a chemistry class and looking at logs and manipulation of logs and exponents, they were going and accessing this particular set of videos and learning library. So I believe that Stemify could be used. So first of all, it's a very adaptable platform and it can be adopted in various different ways to suit the needs of individual instructors and institutions. I don't believe that one size fits all, which means that the flexibility that Stemify offers will be able to exploit that features to suit individual institutions. So that's how Stemify would help people.
Excellent. Okay, no, thank you. And if you're interested in a demo, please do let Laura know. She could be available. And in the next couple of minutes, we'll stay on. Really appreciate everyone who was able to join us today. We realize that you're pressed for time. And clearly, if you're here, you've got a passion. You share our passion in helping students, and we would love to work with you. So again, thank you very much, Amit, Laura.
And I'll stay on. Yeah, I'll stay on if there are any questions that need to be answered.
Thank you. And Susan, thank you to you and the rest of the Stemify team for sponsoring this webinar with us.
So Amit, we do have another question.
Sure.
So the question is, actually it's 2 questions. How does this system work with developmental math and with adult learners?
That's a great question. I mean, isn't that a fantastic spectrum? We have developmental math that could be taken by anyone, whether they are fresh out of school or whether many times we see our students going out ROTC, they're doing things, they have gone to the industry, done something and come back for their education and are adult learners, or they're just retooling themselves to get a better degree to move ahead in their careers. Fundamentally, the system does not differentiate between the age or where they are. It purely works off of what the student shows through their interaction with the content. And it allows the student to be at their own pace and not feel overwhelmed with what they need to do. Because I can understand certainly sometimes, and that's specific to adult learners, I've seen that in my own class, that it is a while that they had taken a math course, and it's not easy for them to just get into the thick and thin of it and be able to just go off on it. But with Stemify, since it covers a gamut of concepts right from pre-algebra and how to write numbers on a number line for all that matters, and how the order of operation works, it really can ease the student into that uh, state of mind where they are now ready to interact with math again and take the fear out. So the whole point here is to actually take that fear out and put it away in a way where we use their strengths to help with their weaknesses.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. So another question that's come up, and it's kind of combining a series of questions, is, we've covered how the University of Connecticut has addressed the higher DFW rates, sort of in broad, like conceptual terms. And perhaps, Nick, this would be an opportunity for you to jump in to answer some of these questions. Can you show us exactly, what the students are going to see when they're in Stemify, and then, maybe illustrate how faculty can use these analytics to be actionable and really help these students be successful in STEM?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I know we're still sort of a little bit over here. So I'll do that, Laura, sort of at a high level. And I would sort of echo what Lisa has said. If there's interest in going a little bit deeper in a demonstration, obviously reach out to Laura, and we're happy to do so at any time. Also, Amit, Lisa, Laura, thank you. Great content. Everything was really engaging, and all the questions that came in were absolutely fantastic. So thank you everyone for that. And if you want to, Laura, go ahead and give me control. I can share my screen, and I believe you did that. Excellent. So right now, envision that I am actually logged in as a student, and I log in and land on my general dashboard. So I can see up top and throughout the dashboard, really any and all content, materials, lessons, assignments, assessments that I've been engaged with or assigned to. So you can see my assessments. In this case, I can take a calculus assessment. I've already taken an algebra assessment, both placement assessments in this case. There's some courses that I'm enrolled in through Stemify, through the Stemify platform. And then down below, my personal study plan, which Amit had described just a bit ago. And right off the top, I can take a look at how I performed in the algebra assessment. You'll be able to see from sort of left to right, some score information, essentially the top score for the assessment. In the middle, my course placement, so I can see all the algebra courses in this case that I placed into, highest being college algebra. In my score history, and that's represented from most recent to the one that took place quite a while ago. And you can see in this case, early on, might have struggled a little bit with some of the concepts, and the assessment scored a bit lower, scored a 14. And then I would have gone through my personalized study plan. So the series of interactive videos, embedded practice questions, practice assignments, so on and so forth that Amit spoke about earlier. And the result of that was my second attempt on 224, where I scored a 32. So you can see that the idea is to assess, engage with your personalized study plan, interactive videos, assignments, practice questions, and then reassess or retake the placement or diagnostic exam, and benefit from the learnings and mastery of those different concepts and retention of those different concepts. You can see a 32 is not a perfect score, so there's still a little bit of room here for improvement. But my personalized study plan is really laid out in front of me here. You can see 0% on quadratic equations, 50% and 50% on factoring and right triangles. And then I did quite well on all these other concepts throughout. And if I dive into sort of what's remaining, it's going to show me really the remaining content that I've got to go through to truly master quadratic equations. So this is, very familiar look and feel here, a series of videos. And for the purposes of demonstration here, I've sort of set it up so I can kind of skip ahead, and have recently watched the complex plane video here. I'll play just a quick snippet of it to really show you how the student is guided through their personalized study plan, really making it easy for them to engage in all the content. So I'll press play. Didn't get to see much of the video, but you'll see here I can continue. It's going to say, all right, great job. You completed the complex plane video. You've got a series of practice problems right in front of you. And then we're going to get into another video, the number I. So if I press continue, we'll just go out and quickly answer a couple of questions, starting with this one. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through. We can check our answer. I can try again. Check answer. In fact, it's practice, so I'm going to skip. And just for the sake of time, familiar interface, I can get through all 10 questions. I'm going to view my results and continue. I can retake the practice, or I could start the next lesson. And in this case, I will go ahead and start the next lesson and engage with the number I video. And I want to point out a couple things here. Amit spoke quite a bit about the interactivity of the videos. That's both from the presentation style of the teacher, of the instructor, as well as the interactive writing within the board. And when I press play here, there's another thing you'll note down bottom are these embedded questions outlined by these blue markers. So every single video has at least 2 embedded questions. And you can see Lane, in this case here, writing on the board, again, engaging the audience, and you see, information laid out on the screen quite nicely. So she's going to transition to the embedded question here. I'm going to actually answer this incorrectly and hit submit. And it says you're wrong. And just like Amit mentioned earlier, all these videos and embedded questions are tagged with a specific concept and a specific point in the video where we actually go back and review that concept. So I'm going to click show me, and you can tell it brings me back to the certain point. It does not start me over at the beginning of the video, so on and so forth. So again, really trying to tie concepts to the questions themselves. And that is a look at sort of, again, the high level view of the students' overall interaction with the platform, how they performed on an assessment, and how they engage in their personalized study plan. I'm going super fast here. I know we are over time. We could spend quite a bit more time here. But I do want to acknowledge that we're just a couple minutes to the top of the hour. So I'm going to pause there and hand it back to Laura. And again, happy to keep going, but I just want to hand it back to Laura.
Hey, Nick, thanks. We have cleared all the questions either during the presentation or here at the end. So lots of thank yous coming through for all of the questions that we've answered. Definitely some interest in learning more about the product and having a deeper conversation. So I'm looking forward to meeting with many of the people that joined the call today. If anyone has some last minute questions that you'd want to post in the Q&A, please do so now. So Lisa, I think I'll hand it back to you. I don't see anything else showing up in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you again, everyone. We will follow up with an email. The recording will be available, and we look forward to hearing from you and potentially working with you. Have a great day. Are we okay?
We actually have 4 people left on the line. I don't know if the 4 participants still have a few questions. Now we're down to 3.
It may be sometimes if you don't close Zoom.
Just wait another minute before I end the meeting here.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I left too soon.
Okay, I don't see any more questions coming up. I know we still have about 3 participants who haven't left the meeting, but I'm going to assume that they have not closed their Zoom application. Now we're down to 2.
You're on mute, Amit.
Do you have another Zoom link that you can send?
Yeah.
And we can just get onto that for a quick debrief.
Sure.
Okay. So I'll leave.
Okay. I think I'll go ahead and end this meeting. I think the 2
Yeah.
that are left have maybe just not closed out their application. Okay.
Okay. I think Lisa is sending us another link, so we'll just get onto that.
Yep. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Bye, Amit. Thank you.